memoir or something. And I told him no, I wasn't interested in writing that. But I did think that a history of the commission and the role it played in the struggle for civil rights and freedom and justice in this country might be useful to people, because I had an idea that the time was going to come that we were going to need to create a new commission to try to deal with some of these problems that we still have, both economic problems and civil rights problems that are connected to each other, and human rights issues around race, around immigration, around sexual orientation, a whole lot of issues that the country needs to deal with, and then the just old garden variety issues. There's poverty and incarceration, and I don't have to listen, you know all the things. I mean, AIDS, and we name it. Anything that's bad, you know, we know what it is, we can name it, and we know what the problems are. And that I thought the commission could help, because I wanted to find out historically how it had helped and see what evidence I had that it helped earlier in the civil rights movement, even before my time. And so that's when they said, okay, if you want to write that, go research it, go write it. So in 2004, I got the information from all the presidential libraries, including the JFK library over here, and all the rest of them, about anything they had in the libraries that had anything to do with the role that the commission played in getting presidents straight on what they should be doing, like we were trying to get Bush straight on what he was doing. And as I started working on it, something occurred to me. I knew that the commission had recommended all the language that's in all the civil rights laws we had. I knew that. I knew that the commission had been the ones that when the people were in the streets and when the people were protesting and everything, the commission would translate their goals and aims into language that could be pushed to get the Congress to pass a law, like the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act, and the Disabilities, Americans with Disabilities Act. All of these pieces of legislation, Title IX, the Education Amendments of 1972, every piece, the Age Discrimination Act, of civil rights legislation, the commission had been present and the staff had working out what the language should be, and people had been very grateful for that. But that was behind the scenes. I wanted to see what else they did, and I started at the beginning in 1957 when Dwight Eisenhower said, look, I need to do something about the race stuff, because you had Montgomery and you had Rosa Parks on the bus, and Martin and his coming to public notice, and the whole civil rights movement. And the Secretary of State told President Eisenhower that all around the world, people are saying that the United States claims to be such a great leader in democracy and human rights, yet you don't give first-class citizenship to Negroes. We were called Negroes then. That was after we were called colored, and before we were called Afro-Americans and then African-Americans. But anyway, we were Negroes in 1957, and before we were black people. Anyway, although we were black people all the time. Anyway, so Eisenhower said, well, what should we do? So the Attorney General said, well, one thing you can do that presidents always do when there's a problem, a big problem, they set up a commission, and then they tell the commission to go and look into it and report back to them. And then when anybody says, Mr. President, what are you doing about that problem? He says, I set up a commission, you know, like 9/11 or whatever commission. And the commission, now we're talking about a Social Security Commission or some kind of commission, or bank bailout commission, something. Anyway, so he said, all right, but I need to put on there moderate, stable men on this commission. What he meant was he was hoping there was somebody who would give him any trouble. And so he found these guys, he nominated, and he said they need to be prestigious. So he got some university presidents, and there were 6 people on there. And one of them was a black guy who was a lawyer from Chicago named Ernest Wilkins, no relation to Roy Wilkins, who had been the president of the Cook County Bar Association, was the best known black lawyer in the state, had argued before the Supreme Court, and was a Republican. At that time, a lot of black people were Republicans. He was a liberal Republican. And he, in fact, had served already in Eisenhower's administration as Assistant Secretary for Labor. So they knew him well, and Eisenhower considered him a moderate man. So he put these moderate men on the commission. Well, and told them, you go out and in a year come back, and he got Congress to pass a law. One mistake he made is they wanted subpoena power, so they could order people to come before them instead of just asking them. And so he said, okay, and Congress had to pass a law to give them subpoena power. They passed it, so they had that tool to use. They went out, and most of them had never traveled throughout the South to all these little places where everything was going on. And when they went to Montgomery, Alabama, which was the first place they went to see what was going on, they were so shocked at the brutality that they saw and that people came and complained about. They decided at first to subpoena everybody, anybody who wanted to come talk. They subpoenaed them so that they would be protected from people taking reprisals against them. The marshals could protect them, embrace the federal government to give them some protection. And a lot of people were intimidated and didn't want to come, even though they had stories about getting beat up and not being able to vote, run off their jobs, not paid, and everything that had happened to them and in all these little towns. But when they went to Montgomery, these people came, and they gave them a subpoena and had them come in. And then they subpoenaed all the officials from the governor on down and made them come to try to answer to these people. George Wallace, who was a judge there then, tried to issue an order to stop him and told him to get out of his state, and they just ignored him, although he was threatening them. And by the time they listened to all these people, they came back, they had religion. They said, we don't know what Eisenhower thinks we're going to do, but what we're going to do is uncover all this and show it to the American public and write reports about it in detail, because it's not just protesters who are just making up something. This stuff is terrible, and something needs to be done. And so they decided to go all over the South. Some places they were run out of and they had to come back. One of them had somebody shoot through their window one night in the place where they were staying. They had trouble going anywhere and staying anywhere. They couldn't take Wilkins with them if they went any place. And then Wilkins had a heart attack and he died. And then another black guy from Howard named George Johnson was put on there. So they had one black. And they did all these hearings and all these reports and took all this testimony, and some of it is in this book, that some of the questions that black people said they were asked when they got ready to go vote. One man said, they asked me how many children, illegitimate children I had, how many bastards I had. And he said, well, what does that got to do with me voting? And I don't have any as far as I know. And the clerk said, yes, you do, I'm sure you do. You wouldn't be a black man if you didn't have, a Negro if you didn't have. And if you got in it, then that means you got moral turpitude, so you can't vote. And all kinds of questions like that. One guy in the book talks about people going to this place and trying to vote, and they were sitting there, and a white guy came by and looked at him and said, what are you sitting here for? And they said, we're trying to wait to vote. He said, if I were you, I would get away from here. And they ignored him. And he came back 15 minutes later, and they were still sitting there. He said, I thought I told you that if I was you, I would get on away from here. And he had 5 other guys with him. So they got on away from there. They said they got on away. And so the commission then gradually came up with these reports. And then they had fights with presidents about the reports, because the presidents, Congress extended them after the year, and then John Kennedy became president, and they were happy. They did these reports saying there should be new civil rights laws. When John Kennedy became president, they were happy. They said, oh, it's sort of like when Obama became president and everybody said, oh, hallelujah, how we got over. They said, oh, he's going to do everything right on civil rights. We just know it. And I have it in all these notes they wrote back and forth to each other. And he came in, and he was a good guy. I know I'm in Boston, so I have to say that. But basically, his biographers say that he wasn't really interested in civil rights. Right. Not that he was against, he just wasn't interested in it. And he didn't think the whole thing was going to last very long anyway. He didn't get religion until the James Meriton incident at Ole Miss. Before that, he just thought this was just something that was going to pass by. And they wanted to go to Mississippi to do hearings. And the Justice Department, under the law, is supposed to enforce subpoenas. Like if they subpoena somebody and they won't come, the Justice Department is supposed to go get that person and bring them in. And if they won't come, then put them in contempt until they do come. Well, he said, my Justice Department isn't going to enforce your subpoena, so if I were you, I wouldn't go to Mississippi. You know why? There were some Southerners, think about the moderate Republicans now and the Republicans. There were some Southern Democrats on the committees in Congress that controlled the budgets. And they were powerful people. And they were from Mississippi and South Carolina. And he didn't want to alienate them. So he kept saying, oh no, you don't need to go to Mississippi. What do you want to go to Mississippi for? And they had to fight him about going to Mississippi. Finally, they did go, and they, in fact, and we know what happened, John Kennedy, unfortunately, with his untimely death.